Welcome to this third in our series of chats with filmmakers in the MetroShorts program in the 35th Annual Washington, D.C. International Film Festival. I'm Linda Blackby, and I wanted to welcome our guests on behalf of myself, the festival, and my co-curator, Juliette Bird. The MetroShorts program is part of our DC for Real section in the festival, which will be showing throughout the festival for free, although you have to reserve a ticket during the whole festival. So please take advantage of this, especially if you're in DC and meet filmmakers who are right there with you. I'm really pleased today that Susan Barocas is going to be our interviewer, our moderator, and Susan has been a film festival director at several festivals here, and she's here in DC. She's also been a documentary filmmaker, and her other professional and probably personal, career and love is cuisine. She's a chef, and she writes about it, and she teaches classes. So Susan, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just delighted to be here today and looking forward to our discussion. I really appreciate that Filmfest DC has focused on DC filmmakers. This area is so rich in talent, and it's wonderful that our kind of hometown festival is really putting forth these filmmakers and their work. Today we have two of them with us, and I'm going to briefly introduce you just so that everyone can get an idea of who you are, where you come from, and then we'll launch into a discussion together. So first of all, we have Abi Cole, and Abi is a film student at George Washington University, Columbian College of Arts and Sciences. She's been making movies on her phone since she was a child, which I just love. At GW, a women's leadership program class on women in the arts made Abi aware of the gender disparities in creative fields, and she became determined to profile a female artist. She created the documentary Between the Lines, which is your short in this festival, as part of her internship with Persistent Productions, which is a production company that's owned by GW alumni. And then we also have with us Adielenah, Perez. Hi, and Adielenah is the director of Super Bella, and which is actually a dramatic short. Adielenah is a Boricua, which is from the Bronx, which is also where I was born, by the way. And that Boricua is a person of Puerto Rican descent, a Puerto Rican by birth or descent. And she's been working toward her goal of writing and directing films since the age of 15, graduating with a BA from SUNY Purchase and a master's of fine arts from the City College of New York. She is dedicated to telling stories centered on women and young girls and making sure women are behind the camera as storytellers as well. She also has a side business, I love this, selling t-shirts with pictures of movie stars with plants. That just sounds like fun. So welcome to both of you, and I'm really delighted to have this conversation. Let's start at the beginning, which really is about how your films came to be. How did you find the story? What drew you to the topic? How did you connect with the story you ended up telling? What was your special lens through which you showed it? And Abi, maybe you could start and also talk about how you connected with Liz, the subject of your film, and decided that she was the person you would profile. And who you might just say a little bit about who Liz is.
Sure. Yes. So with my internship, I was challenged to make my own short documentary, and I wanted to profile a female artist. As Susan said, I was in a women's leadership program, and I really wanted to kind of center that in my story. And so I found her through a Washington Post article, and I just cold emailed her, and she was so gracious to respond to me. And she was also in a similar women's leadership program at her school, University of Richmond. And so I got to connect with her, and she is the first Black female cartoonist for the New Yorker. So I really found her story interesting, and I was so surprised that she's only 23, so she's very young and had just recently graduated college, extremely successful in her field. And she's coming out with graphic novels. She has done a Google Doodle and partnered at the US Open, all sorts of things. So I got to meet with her at her home and studio, her apartment in DC. And we just had like a wonderful conversation kind of right before the pandemic happened. So it was really good timing on that part. And yeah, it was great to connect with her and tell her story through the film.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Adielenah, perhaps you could talk about your story, which focuses on very contemporary issues as well, immigration, and the secrets many of us keep. Where did this come from? Where did the idea for the story come from in the process of writing it?
This is very much a story that is kind of embodies that phrase, writing is rewriting. At first, the first few pages that I wrote was came about because my cat had run away and we couldn't find him, and we had just adopted him, and about 9 days had passed, and then we finally did find him, and I started at the same time I was reading a Murakami story where a cat kind of disappears from someone's home, and someone's trying to find it and can't, and so these two kind of things coincided, and I started just free writing, and then the first story was not very good, and so I kind of put it away and went back to it, and I showed it to a friend, and then the next step was I worked at a karate school at the time that my father owned, and I was talking to students who were dealing with immigration issues with their families and their siblings, and it was something where we were trying to I was just trying to have a conversation with them so that they felt like they had someone to talk to, and it had just that kind of became a very central part to my day-to-day at the karate school, is just kind of helping young people, sort of 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, kind of sort of process some of these feelings, and not in a huge way, but it was just kind of like just being someone that they could kind of talk to a little bit, and so I rewrote the script, and I've always been really interested in writing stories that seem like they're not about any one thing in particular, that seem like they're just about relationship or a friendship, and there's things kind of brooding underneath, and just because that's so much of what life is like, and so it took about from the first time that I started the script, it was about 6 months before it was actually a story that I sent to a mentor of mine who was very, very critical. And I usually would send him scripts and he would say like, well, I think this needs work. And I sent him this one and he said, I would like to produce this with you. And I knew I had touched on something. So I continued to rewrite after that. It took about a year to finally have this story in a way that felt complete. And then even on set, we were still rewriting as we were working with the actors. So it's a long process.
It is a long process. However you do it, if you're in a documentary, it has its own process, with a lot of the storytelling created in the end in the edit room, or, kind of like what's your shooting process? And you have to start thinking about the story then, as Abi, you probably now are very well aware. You've both created films focusing on women of color who are historically underrepresented on the screen. Perhaps could each of you talk about what it means to you to find such stories, to be able to tell such stories, and how your own background influenced the story you told and the stories you want to tell. If you could talk about that a bit. And how about Abi, just go right ahead and dive in if you're ready.
Yes, it's been amazing to kind of be a vessel for Liz's story. And I had to learn a ton of about her experience and just everything that has gone into the white narrative of cartoons, which I was previously blind to just based on my own privilege. I didn't understand that or notice that I guess like 95% of cartoons you see are of white people. So it was really eye-opening to interview her and hear her story. And the documentary, I kind of made it in a way that there's no I don't narrate over what she's saying or kind of introduce stuff. It's all from her mouth, from her point of view. And I collaborated with her and showed her drafts just to make sure that I'm telling her story in the right way and something that she feels is representative of her and her work. And she said that she really loved it and it's been her favorite interview she's ever done in the way that it's come out. So I'm very proud of that. And that it was like such a collaborative process. But yeah, I just based on some of the classes I've taken at school and my experiences I've had, I really love helping to tell the stories of female artists. So it's been really incredible to work on this project with her.
And it's very interesting to follow up that the word accessible is used a lot when describing her work. And is this a reaction to that, the New Yorker's traditional cartoon fare? And how does the idea of accessibility, I'm curious if now that might affect your work a bit more.
Yes, absolutely. That was like kind of the key word of this documentary is that a lot of the previous cartoons, not only is she bringing a new perspective, but she's bringing a new style of cartoon, of drawing, of what the subjects are about. And her main focus is accessibility. So every person's kind of androgynous that's in the cartoon, so it can be applicable to anyone. And these situations are not exclusive to upper middle class people or to white people, which is something she really values, so that kind of everybody can take in a cartoon regardless of your socioeconomic level or where you come from and have the same collective experience and learn a bit, hopefully. So I think, yeah, that's super important to me now that I've talked to her about this and learned about this, the issue of accessibility, just making things that are, just open for everyone to interpret, and you don't need a baseline of a certain upbringing or education to kind of understand what I make in the future is what I hope continues for my work.
And I love the phrase you used, a vessel for Liz's story. I love that idea that as storytellers, when we're trying to tell other people's stories, we are like a vessel for them. Yeah, that's very nice. So, Adielenah, tell me, working on this story, underrepresentation of both women of color and women, period. How did you make some of those decisions of how to tell the story? And also, how did you choose to kind of frame your commentary on the immigration issue? And let's just go with that.
Those are really good questions. When it comes to representation of women and women of color in particular, that's been really important to me for a long time. I think when I started the path to filmmaking, it was already kind of ingrained because I started with documentary and I started with an organization in New York called Global Action Project, where they primarily work with social justice documentaries and are often featuring people of color and underrepresented people in general. And so that's always been kind of like at the center of the just like the belief system behind wanting to create films, because I feel like they're a really wonderful tool for a community to learn from each other and understand each other and build upon each other. And so with this, it was the first thing that I wanted to do was kind of an intergenerational processing sort of thing, where I spent a lot of time with kids because I was teaching martial arts to children, and just realizing how important it is to be able to put yourself in the shoes of a child when you're talking to them and not talking down to kids, because they are listening and they are paying attention. And in communities of color, in my community in particular, Latinos often dismiss children and don't necessarily, it can be challenging because you're thinking like, oh, they're not paying attention, they don't notice that. And so that was kind of the core element. And then thinking like the last component to that was a conversation I had with one of my nieces, who was like 12 at the time, when a Disney movie came out, and she said, Moana came out, and she said, I look like her. She looks like me. And she was so excited, and she felt like she just was just thrilled at having that, at seeing that reflection. And it's kind of, you know, continued with my other nieces, and they look to see films, and they look to read books that with people who they can connect with, and stories that they can relate to. And there's more and more of that. And so I have always had it in the back of my head that I mostly make films for them. When I make something, I'm thinking about my nieces and my nephews and how I want them to feel represented in the world. And so my audience is very small when I'm thinking about it. I want them to feel good, and I want them to feel like someone is thinking of them. And then I hope that it expands, and other people and other children and other communities can see themselves reflected as well. But those are just the loves of my life, and so I want them to feel good moving through the world. And so that's how I think about the films I make, and this one in particular.
It's so interesting that, you know, yes, your audience is small if you think about it only as your nieces and nephews, but there are many nieces and nephews that, you know, need to see this, and grandchildren and children. And this idea of putting a belief system on the screen, you know, being able to do that. Could you talk a little bit about what it meant for the characters to harbor secrets, and how that also kind of shaped the film?
It was a constant conversation. We had many rehearsals with the actors, because they were trying to communicate a lot without saying too much. And so I worked with them a lot, with all of the three actresses, to figure out what were their secrets. So even beyond the little girl kind of talking about her parents being deported in the end, or mentioning it really, there were all these little secrets that didn't make it into the film that we don't know about. Like, there's things that we ended up cutting some of the dialogue, but there are things about, like, whose house this is. This is her friend's house, and she also knows that her friend's family was also taken away or sent away, deported, and she doesn't know how to process that. And there's like little things that were written in, and that we talked about a lot, that in the film we don't really talk about, because they didn't make it into the script, but they were part of how that I wanted the actors to think about themselves, and I wanted the actors to feel like they had a full life outside of the short film. And so there were a lot of little stories and little things that had happened in their kind of character's life that would never have made it onto the screen. But that we talked about, like why they wore certain jewelry, why they wore certain clothes, where the jacket came from. Like, did the actress kind of like take it from a friend's house and never return it, and things like that, where it's like there's all these tiny little things you never talk about. And then the big thing that they never talk about that comes up in the end is kind of like a sort of a culmination of all of that. I don't know if I'm answering the question exactly, but it was kind of talking about all of the little things we don't always know we're keeping a secret. We just don't always think it matters to anyone else, or that anyone else will care, or that anyone else will notice. And it becomes a secret. And that's kind of what this was, where it was more like, I don't know how to express these things. I don't know how to express my feelings. I don't know what I feel, and I don't have time to process it. And so it kind of turns into a secret, because at some point it feels like it's gone too far. How do I talk about it now? So that was kind of the idea with the secrets, was that it wasn't like one big secret that you had always been keeping. It just ended up that way.
Yeah, you know, this idea of backstory, all those little things that inform a character. And it's true whether you're making a documentary, you have to have a sense of backstory, or if you're making something dramatic, you know, you have to have a sense that there's backstory to all of these characters. And so let's talk about making a short film, because you've alluded to it a little bit already, but you know, each of you told the story within the boundaries of a short film. That's not a lot of time. Did you find it restrictive, liberating, and in what ways? So, and also, by the way, was there anything that ended up on the cutting room floor? I know you already said there's dialogue and that was left out, but is there scenes, is there other things that ended up on the cutting room floor that in looking back you wish you could have included? So let's talk about making shorts. Abby, do you want to dive in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I found it was really interesting just because I had about 30 minutes, I think, of like, usable information, and then I cut it down to around 4.5 minutes. Um, and yeah, there was a lot that was cut, but it was really interesting just to go through this process and knowing that I'm going to have it within a certain time frame, a kind of 4 or 5 minute story. And there is so many revisions, script revisions, where it just gets cut more and more and more. I'd love to go back. I should go back and read the first one and just see what all was there. But yeah, something that was cut was Liz kind of talked a little bit about her rise to in the film. She spoke about how she initially contacted the New Yorker through their and she already kind of had a little bit of a following um, on Instagram. But yeah, there's some parts that I cut about how she kind of created a following on Instagram, which propelled her into submitting to the New Yorker, just because she just started in college creating cartoons, posting them on Instagram. People liked it. And so that kind of fueled her desire to do this professionally.
And why was it 4 to 5 minutes? Where did that time frame come from?
Yeah, I wanted to do something on the shorter side because this is my first film, so I wanted to not go too far and have any dead space kind of in the film. And then my mentor, who was the producer of this project, she kind of recommended that time frame. So I just went along with it, and I think I'm really satisfied with the length. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. You know, it's a great exercise in storytelling to give yourself a limit like that and try to get it across, which you have done in the story. So, Adielenah, you want to talk about telling your story within the short format?
I've always thought that the short film format is really good for really figuring out what's at the core of the story, how you really want people to feel from your film when they walk away from it. And then if you wanted to expand into a feature film, you know, if you can kind of like do this really well, you at least you've built up the kind of bones of storytelling with film. And so I would say I probably did find it restricting at first, because the script is about 15 pages. And when it started as 5, it went all the way to 15, where I expanded and I had all these other elements. I did have an entire scene that did not make the cut. And I had 2 scenes. I have an entire plot point that didn't make the cut. But I sent it kind of as we cut a lot of things while we were filming because we were running out of time. And then once we had the first cut, that was around 12 minutes, I sent it to my mentor, and he said, you know, you can't make the film you wrote, you have to make the film you shot. And so you have to take away some of the things that don't look good anymore. You thought it was going to look good, you thought it was going to be really important, but it's no longer. So he went out and pointed out, he's like, this is ugly. Doesn't look good. This doesn't make sense anymore. And it was shots that were most of the film. We worked really hard to make it aesthetically pleasing as well, have like some poetry in there. And then there were shots that we had to film, and we did them kind of in a rush because we were racing against time and the sun, and you can tell. And so my mentor said, like, cut it. Whatever doesn't look good, whatever doesn't work, whatever doesn't fit the sort of tone that you set from the beginning, you have to get rid of it, or you'll have just like a mediocre film. So kill your babies, I guess, your darlings, that's what they say. And so there was a lot of doing that, and a lot of kind of it was a little bit challenging, and so is this a spoiler if I say something that was supposed to be there that isn't? So then
No,
in the end of this film of Super Bella, we were supposed to see that the cat was dead, and that the little girl had found the cat and was upset that the cat was dead. And then once we filmed it, my mentor said, it doesn't matter. That's actually less interesting. It doesn't look good. We couldn't film a dead cat, like we had like a toy, but it just didn't look good. And so he was just like, it doesn't, it's more impactful if we never know what the kid finds. And if we can kind of project our own feelings onto what she's going through and kind of interpret and read between the lines versus spoon feeding in a little bit more of a Hollywood fashion. So that was very hard news to take, that it wasn't going to work out the way I wanted. But I did realize that the cat wasn't the point of any of it for the characters, for the film. And so that was a big lesson of just like sometimes you have to let go of what you thought you were doing in order to do something that is worthwhile.
And I have to tell you, I thought that not finding the cat was actually part of the story, because it gave me the same feeling of she has no idea what happened to her parents. She has no idea what happened to the cat. So it's very interesting that you say this idea of when you let go, sometimes it actually brings something bigger or better to your project. I'm impressed by how you both talked about the role of mentors. And we're going to wrap up shortly, but is there anything else either of you'd like to say about your film, where you're going, your next project, what your mentors are telling you should do next?
I haven't talked to my mentor in a little bit. I have been meaning to, but I'm actually taking a little bit of a break from just a year-long break from film and writing for film, because I've been following this career path since I was 15 and I'm 34 now. And I've just been unsure of what comes next, how to continue building, and I feel like it's a good time to do a little bit more listening and a little more instead of trying to tell my stories, really just absorbing more and sort of going back to school in a way and being a student of life sort of thing. So I've been working as a creative director for a long time, and so now I'm excited to step back and do more sort of research and learning and just kind of I don't know if traveling is ever going to be on the radar again, but I feel like that's going to be an important period of putting a pause on something that I've been doing for a really long time and figuring out what's next.
Great. And Abby, any last words?
Yeah, so I guess next steps for me, I am going to be a senior next year in college, so graduating is important, I guess. But yeah, I'm always looking for new stories, new things to, I don't know, talk to people about, get some interesting perspectives. So yeah, I'm always on the lookout, but no solid plans right now. Yeah. And just also, if you're interested in Liz's story, she is coming out with a graphic novel that's like a memoir about her life in August of 2022, I believe, through Simon & Schuster. And she has a ton of other projects and work. You can check her out at Liz at Large on Instagram.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been really, really interesting. I've watched your films. I'm going to go back and watch them again now that I have all of this input from you. So thank you both. And again, just to remind people, the MetroShorts are available for free. You just have to go online and register or reserve a ticket with Filmfest DC, and you can see lots of terrific work by Abi, Adielenah, and all the other filmmakers that are in this MetroShorts section. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.